Welcome to Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. I'll be covering every studio song the band has recorded and every bonus track that I can find. Each week we'll go over a new song from the beginning to where they are currently, and as they keep adding albums, I'll keep adding shows. Let the deep dive party begin.
In the magic garden, some were singing, some were dancing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. My name is Scott Haskin and I am your host on this fan-based but band-endorsed podcast. And while today we may be weeping in silence, we don't have to do it alone because I have an amazing guest for you today, the social media director himself of Uriah Heep, Dave White. Dave, how are you?
Hey, Scott. How are you? Good to be here.
Thanks. I'm doing great, my friend. How are you?
I am fine. I'm fine. It's nice and warm in Cleveland today.
Well, that's
60 degrees.
That's a good change of pace.
Winter has ended, I hope.
Yes. Unlike my friends in Colorado who just got bombed with a couple more feet of snow, and apparently they have another storm on the way.
Yeah, we're looking for a wet weekend and maybe cool down somewhat, but I think for the most part, winter's done. And I'm very happy about that.
Yeah.
I'm tired of it.
Spring back east is a beautiful thing.
It is. And we're just south of Lake Erie. So when it gets nice out in the wind, warm comes over the lake and the snow goes away. It's really very pretty here. Although we're an industrial city, it's a really nice environment.
Nice. Yeah. Growing up in Detroit, this was that time of year that I was like, finally, we can be done with this. And, you know, I don't have to sludge my way to school or anything anymore.
And I did walk 7 miles every day to go to school. I'm telling you the truth.
And it was uphill.
It was uphill and it was always snowing.
At least one way it was uphill anyway.
That's you're right.
Well, I have to ask you now, you've been the social media director for Uriah Heep for a long time, but you actually started kind of the way I did as a fan project.
I started as a fan project. I hooked up with a gentleman in Singapore 1996, and one thing led to another, and he eventually decided to back out because it was too busy taking up too much family time. So I took over the group of pages that we had, and bought a domain name with the help of 10 other people. And the domain name became UriahHeep.com, which it is now. And that was in 97. So I have owned that and supported this band online since 1997. It's been a long, really good haul. Yeah.
And to clarify the reality of the time frame of this, the internet was kind of a thing, but not really a huge thing yet. So you're really like one of the pioneers of designing a band website.
Well, my background's IT, and when the internet started, I was absolutely taken. I was just taken away with it. It was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And when I figured out how to make a web page, and we did websites, the first thing, and I'll tell you, I've heard this 150 times. The first thing I did when I got online is look up Uriah Heep, because I wanted to see what was out there on whatever search engine there was at the time. And the first thing I typed in was, Uriah Heep, and there they were. And there's 3 or 4 websites, 5 or 6 websites maybe. And I just got totally engrossed in building sites, and eventually made contact with Mick Box. Mick was my first actually email contact with any member of the band, and that was in 97. And he fully endorsed the fact that we wanted to start a domain name and build a quote unquote official website for them. And they have been behind this thing since day one. And I started as a fan, and the first thing I looked up on the internet was, where's Uriah Heep? And they showed up. So I knew I was in good hands, and the internet was going to be very kind to us, and it has been.
That was, I'm guessing that was like probably a GeoCities or maybe an AOL search box.
Maybe CompuServe.
Oh, CompuServe, yeah.
Yeah, maybe CompuServe. And when they started to tour, when the website was really, really brand new, they would tell everybody about it when they were on stage. Go to Uriah-Heep.com, and people found us really quickly. And it turned out to be a really awe-inspiring, totally engrossing. I spent 10 years in my basement talking to people. I mean, on the emails and all kinds of different ways to communicate, because we became the place to go if you were a Uriah Heep fan. Now, we weren't the first, And there were many others with us at the same time. But since the band endorsed us, we became the go-to spot.
Well, sure. And if you go to Google and look up Uriah Heep right now, your page is the first one that comes up.
Right, right.
Yeah. And you have spent 30 years basically plus working on this website. How many pages is the website now?
Oh, geez. There were actually at one time 3 of us doing this. There was a gentleman in Holland. There was a gentleman in Rio de Janeiro and myself. And we all built pages. We probably have 2,000 or 3,000 out there. 98% of them aren't current, but they're there and they can be found. And I sometimes would just surf and go from old page to old page and see the stuff, that we used to do. But now with Facebook, the site has taken its normal attritional place as a legacy element of the Uriah Heep search, but everything we do that could be, and because Facebook is so much more interactive and it's real time, and you can do things that you can do on Facebook you can't do on a website without a lot of work. So it's taken over. Obviously, we have 330,000 subscribers on our Facebook page, and then we have Twitter, and we have Instagram, and we have the other sites that I do for. I do one for Mick Box too, and that has a lot of traffic. But I think the main focus right now is Facebook. So my job, I'm in charge of everything you see on the net that's officially coming from the band, other than Instagram. Someone else does the Instagram stuff, but I do everything else, and I really, really still enjoy it as much as I did the first day.
Yeah, Mick just posted today. Of course, we're recording this episode really early, but Mick posted today in real time on Instagram that their Instagram just hit 10,000, and I thought, man, that's just so cool.
Pretty cool, huh?
To know that. We're going to put out a song and 10,000 people on our Instagram are probably going to listen to it, and, 380,000 on Facebook. And it's just crazy when you think about just what you do normally out of the love and all that is going to connect with that audience. It's just mind boggling.
It's a pretty powerful podium, I have to tell you. Sometimes I'll put a post out off our Facebook page, and I'll go back and look at it 30 seconds later, and it's hit, 11,000 people. I mean, it goes really fast. And things get forwarded and re-forwarded, Twitter's the same way, but it's not as intense. It gets forwarded and re-forwarded and I guess re-twittered. And with, with the use of hashtags, everything shows up everywhere. So if you do it right, your stuff is showing up everywhere now for me. I see Magicians podcasts all over the place.
Yes. And thank you, by the way. I want to say that too. I know I thank you every week, but since you're here, thank you so much for all the reposting that you do, all of the sharing and all that. I mean, I'm only going to reach so much of an audience, but you're tapped into that fan base. So that's helped the show enormously. And I can't thank you enough for all the extra time I've taken away from your life reposting my posts.
Well, I'll tell you something, Scott, from one fan to another, your show is great. It's just what we needed. I think it's outstanding, really well done. And it's interesting. It's fun. You do a great job. Well,
thank you very much. I appreciate it. I love connecting with people that are like, I know this band, but I can't think of any of their songs, or I've heard of them and I've just never given them a chance. And now I am. Like just turning new people on to Uriah Heep is such a joy for me.
Well, you're very good at it, and the band totally appreciates it. We are having a ton of fun with you. I want you to know. So this is great.
Well, good. Thank you. I enjoyed interviewing Russell. I'm looking forward to meeting the rest of the guys. Of course, I've gotten to know Mick a bit through all of this, and I have to say, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, because when people talk about hard rock bands, there's this stigma of they have to wear leather, they have to look angry in all their pictures, they have to look menacing, their album covers need to be dark, they need to be, tearing up hotel rooms. And the most controversy I hear about Uriah Heep is who played what solo.
Well, they did have their days when they were tearing up hotel rooms and they wore flamboyant things, and back in the 70s and, in the main part of the mid 70s, when they were at what the people call the quintessential Uriah Heep lineup, they were doing those kinds of things, but they very quickly, I think, came to their senses, maybe in the next 5 or 6 or 7 years, and calmed down. And, the band was reformed a couple of times. So I think that takes its toll. And I think for the guys, and especially for Mick, it was more about making sure the music would survive than the band was going to, than the band was going to be a newsbreaker. So I'm sure he made sure that it's quieted down somewhat, and they weren't as rambunctious as they were at one time. I think he did that. I think that was a conscious effort.
Yeah, I think it would have to be, because once you're kind of on that train, somebody needs to pull you off of that car. You're probably not going to just get off of it yourself if you're given free reign to do whatever, and you have minders that are
and on top of that, their touring schedule was grueling. I mean, for a while, they were playing hundreds and hundreds of gigs a year. So that's tough on you. You can't party all the time. You have to slow down a little bit. So, but they did have their heyday of doing those crazy kinds of things for sure.
Well, what's really amazing about it is that not only were they touring intensively, but they were cranking out album after album very quickly of amazing music.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. And this is one of those albums. This is a different kind of album to me, but this is kind of in their middle wandering period as far as I'm concerned. Not totally into the wandering part, but getting there. And their 26 studio albums is a lot of albums, and they did 10 of them relatively quickly. So
yeah, exactly.
I agree with you.
And this is an interesting phase for the band too, because you've got you still have David Byron in the band, but you've also got John Wetton, who's a fantastic singer in his own right.
Right.
That had to be a tough balance for them to figure out, without people getting upset or being territorial, who was going to sing what.
I think at this stage of the game, David was suffering because of his drinking situation, and I think Wetton was a good choice to sing along with him or to replace him if he had to. David was hurting, and obviously, this is the last album that he was on, so there probably was some animosity in there. Sure, yeah, I think so.
And it's certainly understandable. It's also hard for the rest of the band members to watch somebody that they love so dearly kind of disintegrating the way he was, and still try and keep up appearances and do shows and be confident when you're playing, because you got to trust your bandmates on stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, speaking of on stage, let's talk about one more thing before we get into the song. So you're spearheading a campaign to get Uriah Heep inducted into the American Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I know that they're in a similar European version of it, but where are we at with this?
The 2021 elections have been made already. Mm-hmm. So the Cleveland, the Rock Hall in America is actually headquartered in Cleveland. Because Cleveland is, quote unquote, the capital of rock and roll, because Alan Freed, who coined the term rock and roll, was from Cleveland. He was a disc jockey back in the 50s. I believe it was, I think 57 he did this. Anyway, so Cleveland became known as the quote unquote capital of rock and roll. And when they lobbied to do the Rock Hall here, to build it here, Cleveland won. There was New York and Los Angeles and some other places. And Cleveland ended up winning and built the Rock Hall here. So it's been 15 or 20 years now since that thing started. And a couple of years ago, I talked to Ace and the band and stuff. And I said, let's try to get you guys in there. So I started a petition. We garnished a couple, 3,000 votes or so this year. They didn't make it this year. And I don't know, I'm not going to go into how the Rock Hall picks their people. You can kind of read between the lines somewhat, but I'd love to see them in it. And they are as seminal as anybody can be to be in the rock and roll. You have to be a 25-year music veteran, and they are well over 25 years.
Yeah, twofold.
Twofold. So we're just trying to get as many people as we can to sign up the petition, which the management hopefully will, when we get enough people that makes it look substantial, if they can figure out who to contact and maybe push a little bit, maybe Uriah Heep will be recognized, and they need to be recognized. They are as important to rock as any of the top four bands were that were, with them. There's Led Zeppelin, Uriah Heep, Deep Purple. They need to be in there.
I agree, and it's interesting that but the petition itself does not guarantee them entrance. It just gives the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, hey, there's a lot of people that are interested in this, you should take a look. Or does it actually get you in the door?
No, it's just simply a fan-based, hey, we'd love to see those guys in the Rock Hall. Here we are. You guys should, you got to let them in because they're great and blah, blah, blah. And they deserve to be there. People do petitions for everything. And this is hopefully something that the Rock Hall can notice and remember who they were if they don't remember. And those are people that do remember, because a lot of the Rock Hall people know who they are. Obviously, they have to know who they are because they're so famous.
Right. Yeah.
So
maybe we should
it's
just
our way of pushing.
Send it in with a copy of Lady in Black or something, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, okay.
I remember those guys.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to review this song with you. Now, we're talking about Weep in Silence from the album High and Mighty. To me, it's been, it's just a beautiful song. What made you pick this one to talk about?
I've always liked it. I've recorded it with other people. I have played it for years and years and years. I always thought that it was different in that, well, first of all, musically, it's really beautiful. Those 4-layer guitars, and there's 4 guitars in the beginning of this thing. There may even be a bit of a steel guitar. I'm not sure, but there's definitely Ken doing slide. And there's 4 guitars that I can hear. I think 2 are going through a Leslie or some kind of a choral pedal, maybe like a chorus or a phaser or something. But it's really a beautiful set. Sounds like kind of like a Roland JC 120, where it's got that beautiful chorus going. But the organ is not the typical Ken Hensley organ. It's very clear. There's no distortion. And the Leslie on this thing, normally he ramps up and ramps down slowly with the rotor and the tweeters doing a rotor and the treble horns at different. This is not like that. When it turns on, everything speeds up. When he turns it off, everything stops and slows down and does a choral again and slow rotation. So, but it's a beautiful organ track, and his guitar work, I've always thought it just perfectly fit this song. It's real Ken. So I'm not sure Mick was even on this one. He may have been somewhere in there. I've talked to him about it, and I know he didn't do the guitar solo. That's definitely Ken. But if Mick was in the beginning of it, so be it. I can't guarantee that.
Did this song
appear? I've always loved the song. I just think it's a beautiful tune.
Oh, I agree. It's always been one that just kind of when it comes on, it just grips me. It's like you need to stop doing other things and just sit down and pay attention to me. It's that kind of song. But you said that you don't think Mick was on it. It's got to be tough to remember every little detail of every little song that you've done over the course of 50 years. But you worked with Ken on some stuff. Did you guys do this one together, or was this one that you did on your own?
I didn't record this one with Ken Hensley. I did it with some other Heep fans. One person was in Germany. Actually 2 of them were in Germany, and myself. And we had I forget how we did the drums actually, but we did this, I don't know, 1999 or something, way back when cassettes were being mailed back and forth.
Right.
And people would load the cassettes on their home computer, on their home tape deck, and add a track and take it off their home tape deck and mail it to the next person who may be in a different country. But that's how we would do it back then when we first started doing all these recordings. And
you had to wait weeks for the postal to arrive, and then you got to load it in and try and line it up with the other tracks. And it was challenging back then.
And it was there was no computers. I mean, you turned on your deck and you put it on play, and you hit one channel on record, and you added a track. And when you got done, that track was the track. I mean, obviously you couldn't load it somewhere and massage it. You'd have to redo it kind of basically, but that's how we did it then.
Yeah, because your other option would have been reel to reel, but then you still got the same issue. You'd still have to line the tracks up. So
we all had Tascam tape decks or Fostex tape decks, but everybody had a cassette deck of some kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
I had a really nice Tascam 234 cassette-driven 4-track. And that was a pretty cool unit for the time.
I had a 788, which was 8 channels.
Oh,
imagine that.
Wow.
That was a nice deck. Most of the stuff I did right before I got a computer that I had computer music software on, most of the stuff I did was on that Tascam. All the stuff we did for the Heepsteria release in 98 was done on that.
Very cool. And we're going to have to do a review of that at some point here, because there is some just great sounding stuff on there. And especially if you think about the way it was recorded compared to technology now, I think the sound is fantastic.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun to put together.
For sure. Now, I said I was going to go into the song next, but I have to digress for just a moment and ask you one last question. So I
Sure.
had the pleasure of getting to know Ken a little bit, and I was very grateful I got to speak with him shortly before he passed, when this podcast was just starting up after, 25, 30 years of having lost touch with him. But, in your opinion, he just seems like one of the nicest people, obviously a very talented creative and a keyboard player. But what was it like to actually work with him?
He was, when we recorded in his studio, we recorded, I think, 8 songs over the course of 4 days. And he was extremely friendly. He knew that he knew more about his own music than anybody. So he would point us towards certain things and suggest certain things. But he was really good to work with. I mean, he was so knowledgeable about recording in general, about the technology behind his studio, which actually was a full-blown studio, obviously. But he was a good, friendly person to us. He was very helpful. He'd give us honest opinions. He was, we would laugh a lot and go outside and smoke cigarettes and talk to each other and come back inside and do another track. And it was really interesting because this was Ken Hensley. This was the guy that I always thought was the world's greatest organ player, period. I mean, as far as a rock organist, he was my hero. And to be there in that studio, and I got a chance. I'll tell you a very short story. We were all there in his studio one day, and in between our tracks, the guys went to lunch, and I was talking to Ken, and I said, "Can you play something for me so I can hear what you sound like?" Right? So he goes, "Well, sure, mate, sure." So I went and leaned up against the Leslie. He had a 122 Leslie in the studio, and I leaned up against it, and he just cranked that thing up and went for it. So my back is against the Leslie cabinet. My ears are where the rotors are. My rear end is feeling the woofer, and he's just going at it. It was awesome. It was like crazy, So he that's the way he was. He wanted you to hear his music, but he wanted you to like his music too. And I think he accomplished everything he wanted to, just about. He was a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Just in the time that I talked to him back when the internet was first starting up, and then, obviously more recently, he's just somebody that I thought, I really wish I had gotten to know him, because he just seems like somebody I would want to have long conversations with, and not just about music, but just about life, because he was just so enthusiastic and energetic. And he got so many of his ideas just by seeing something and then writing a whole song about it. And
I went to his house.
I love that.
I went to his house one time for a very long afternoon. I got there at like 10 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night, when he was in England. And he showed me this little 4-track. I'm not sure if it was like a Zoom 4-track device that he was doing prototype songs on. He would just noodle and put these things on tape. We talked all afternoon about him and his music. It was really an interesting day. He was super friendly. He was just a nice, incredibly talented person whose music I really loved, and obviously a whole bunch of people also did. So he was good.
Yeah, and to show how nice he was, when I interviewed him, he actually sat in his car for the interview. And I said, because I asked him before we started, I said, "Now, before we start, are you comfortable? Do you need anything?" And he's like, "No, I'm just in my car." I'm like, "You're in your car?" He goes, "Yeah, I've got about 10 dogs. So if I go in the house, we won't be able to record anything." And I thought,
that's great.
That's so generous, though, to just, I'm going to sit out here. Of course, it was early in the morning for him, but I thought that was very nice of him to do.
Well, at least at work, he found a way to make it work.
Yeah, he did. All right, well, let's dig into Weep in Silence. Now, I do have this episode listed as 2 versions of Weep in Silence. However, the second version is just the typical extended type version that we've heard on some of these deluxe albums, and there's really no new material. It's just kind of chopped up and repeated. So there's really nothing new there. A couple of odd transitions, but apart from that, just the regular song that we're about to hear now. So here from the album High and Mighty is Uriah Heep doing their song Weep in Silence. I think I could have made a good DJ.
You could have. You definitely could have.
I want to stop it right here because we've got a lot going on, and I'm going to defer to you for the guitars in a second. But as much as I love the mix of this song, I think the drums are a little bit loud.
The drums sound like a drum machine. That's Lee being extremely right on the beat.
Yes,
and that's probably a pattern you can pick off any drum machine. They're a little loud in the mix. I like it that way. I think they make the song sound better that way. I think there's 4 guitars in there, Scott. I think there's like I said earlier, I think there's 2 of them with some kind of Leslie or flange or rotating speaker effect. One straight, somebody on slide, and somebody maybe on a steel pedal, but I'm not positive about that one. But there's definitely some slide work going in there, and they're very, very clear, and they're really well separated.
I could be wrong, but I want to say there's a Fender Rhodes underneath of that too, maybe.
I think so also. If there's a piano in there, yeah, a Rhodes sounds about right.
Yeah.
Maybe a Wurlitzer, but yeah.
It's such a beautiful balance of tone between the things that the guitars are going on. It's almost dreamlike.
And those guitars are pretty high pitched. So with the low of the piano and the high pitch, and the high pitch of some of those 2 guitars, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's a really nice balance. Now, you've played this song. Is this one that the band would have done live?
I don't know. I would hope so. I think so, but I can't answer that.
That gets to be part of the challenge, though, with a band like this. If you're doing something that has 4 guitars and an electric piano under it, you have to compensate something somewhere.
You just simplify the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You could do the beginning with 1 guitar. It wouldn't have the impact, but the other guitar has to do the guitar solo. That's going to come up. So maybe they didn't do it live, but I don't know the answer. I'm sure someone out there will tell us.
They probably
everyone out
will.
there seems to know more than most of us.
Well, I remember on one of the Ask Mick episodes, somebody had asked him about doing a song live, and I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was. But the answer that he gave was because there are only so many people, they can't do what they did in the studio. So the song just doesn't have that same, it doesn't come across right. Because
that
the
might have been
balance
Circle of
isn't there.
Hands. That might have been Circle of Hands. Yeah.
Yeah, very possibly. Well, let's see what happens next, because I love where the song is going. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Uriah Heep, the Magicians Podcast. If you have enjoyed this show, please consider going over to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast outlet, leaving a rating or a review. Be sure to subscribe to make sure that you are notified when new episodes are available. Please be sure to share this podcast with your fellow Uriah Heep enthusiasts and anyone who you think would like Uriah Heep, which should be everyone. And if you are so inclined, please feel free to contribute to the Patreon account. And if you are not a Patreon subscriber, you can also pay through the PayPal link on the website listed in the show links below. I would also like to thank Uriah Heep for their very generous support of the show, and thank you guys for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Happy days!